Yeah, welcome back. I'll switch to English now, since our next speaker is prefers speaking English. So the next talk is about protocols for the communication between chargers and EVs, electrical vehicles. And since I got my first electrical vehicle last 2 weeks ago, I've been really looking, from a very personal point of view, forward to this talk, so I can actually understand a bit about what's going on and why sometimes there are a few surprises when you try to charge your vehicle. So Brian, I'm really grateful you could come here today and tell us about that and shed a little light about what's going on. So I guess you can introduce yourself, and thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, I'll introduce myself in a slide, but I guess today I'll be talking about the grid, protocols, and kind of how we interact with that from a programming perspective, infrastructure perspective. Very quickly, I'm an engineering director here at Monta. I joined the company as the founding engineer, so I had to figure out what is a charge point, how does it work, how can we control it. That was a fun part of the experience. I've been working in software for about 13 years. I'm an amateur electronics nerd, so I really like messing around with that kind of stuff. And all of the knowledge that I've acquired around the grid has been in the last 4 years from the perspective of a software engineer. So hopefully I can explain some of that to you guys. About Monta. So we're an EV charging platform. We were founded in Copenhagen. We started about 4 years ago. Now we're around 300-ish employees. And kind of an important distinction to make is that we don't make any hardware ourselves. We only provide the software. And the company was kind of started with the ambition to make the transition over to EVs as smooth as possible. So when we kind of first started the company, starting a charge was quite difficult. And I kind of want to believe that we've made it a little bit easier to do that. And then a little bit about our tech stack. We have a PHP monolith. So when we first started the company, that was like how we built our MVP. And then we have Kotlin services used with domain-driven design. We're running on JVM 17, and some services are running on 21. We primarily use MySQL 8, Redis, Kafka, OpenSearch, infrastructure as code with Crossplane and Argo CD, and Kubernetes via AWS EKS. And then just to kind of give an overview of all the stuff we offer at Monta in terms of like infrastructure, we have a customer to, or business to customer offering, which is our app. Then we have the hub, which is more B2B. That's kind of how you manage a fleet of charge points. And then we have like various different portals that can help you debug a charge point. But not super important for this talk. It's just kind of get an overview of what we have built. Okay, so I want to start off first by explaining the problem. So I don't know how many people here are familiar with the grid and how it works, but essentially at least in Europe, all of the grid is connected, right? So every generator needs to be spinning at a certain frequency. And if they fall below a certain resonance, so in Europe it's 50 hertz, then bad things happen. So blackouts, brownouts, these kinds of things. So consumption must always be met with demand and vice versa, right? So if there's too much energy consumption, then the grid falls below that 50 hertz. If the system is in balance, then we're exactly at that 50 hertz. But if there's too much power, then we go above. So yeah, and one of the problems we have is that the grid is very old. You know, electricity has been around for a while. It's of course been upgraded, but upgrades can't always keep up with demand. So I think it's kind of important to point out who's responsible for making sure that the grid is working properly. So in Denmark, it's called Energinet. In the UK, it's National Grid. And they're called TSOs. So they're basically responsible for making sure that 50 hertz is always maintained. So I don't know if anybody's ever heard that fun story. Like back in the day, in the UK, National Grid would have the BBC running alongside their panels or whatever, and they would watch for when the BBC would go to commercials. And that was because everybody in the UK drinks tea during commercials. So everybody turning the tea kettles on at once would result in the grid dropping. So they basically had to make sure, okay, There's actually a YouTube video you can find where they're recording him do it. He's watching, he's like, okay, commercials, and then he starts calling power plants to go online. That doesn't happen anymore. It's all automated, and that's kind of part of the work what we're doing today. So what is the problem? So the problem is basically that EV adoption is taking off, right? So 1 in every 5 cars sold today is an EV, and the majority of that is actually in China, but we're not doing too bad in Europe. I think, so the purple right there in that graph is basically what we're selling in Europe. So if you go in kind of a ladder, China's probably number 1 in selling EVs, then it's Europe, and then it's the US. Yeah, so this is a more specific graph of what Europe is, how many EVs are available in Europe right now. So are we ready for the influx EVs? There are some parts of Europe that are more ready than others. So in Denmark, we're kind of in the orange range, partially prepared. And if you can see here, the overall ranking is 15 out of 25. And that's kind of like because Denmark is suffering from too much wind production, so it's volatile. Meaning, I don't know if you guys have seen that sometimes energy prices can go negative, and that's because the wind's blowing too hard. And that might seem like it's a good thing, but in reality, a stable grid is a happy one, meaning that prices should be relatively stable, production should match demand, and that doesn't always happen. So if you can see here, in the difficulties for the grid transition, so yeah, where is it? Low battery capacity, meaning that when all this wind power is produced, we basically have to try to sell it as fast as possible and get somebody to consume it. If we had batteries, we could probably offset that by just storing the wind power in the batteries. We don't have demand response, or it's kind of ramping up now, but that's part of what we're trying to help solve. And so the problem's getting a little bit worse now that 50% of new cars sold in Denmark are an EV, meaning that the demand for power is going up. And then here you can see kind of like 50% of all electricity produced in Denmark comes from wind, some from coal, biofuels, solar's kind of coming up. But it's just to say that it's a very volatile energy production. Okay, so besides basic demand and supply problems, there are other issues that can arise with the grid. One of them being connections between the countries. So the EU is one big connected grid, and it works kind of like stock trading, because in between countries and regions, you can sell electricity to each other. So on the day that Denmark's not producing enough wind power, then it buys power from Norway, or it buys power from Sweden or whatever. But these connections, there can be a fault, something can go wrong, and when that happens, you need kind of a really quick solution to make up for that lack of production. Another thing that can happen is power plants can go offline. Maybe a turbine breaks or something overheats, these kinds of things. And then in the picture, you can see all of the different grid connections that exist. It's not completely correct, but fun fact. So between Denmark 1, so the west side, and the east side, it's actually separated. So they're not synchronizing the hertz between the west side and the east side. And this is kind of an example of what happened. I think this was pretty recent. One of the reactors went offline in Finland, and we had to kind of react to that and supply. Basically, the way we react to it is by shutting off demand. And that's what we're doing today with charge points and various other assets. So at Monta, we have about 116 megawatts of charge points. It's what we hit a peak so far. We kind of average around 90, 80. And to put that kind of into perspective, the wind farm right off of here in Copenhagen is about 40 megawatts. So roughly 3 wind farms worth of power. Or if we allow for some napkin math, the average Danish home uses around, let's say, 3,750 kilowatt hours of electricity a year, which means 160 megawatts is enough to power around 271,000 Danish homes. So that's around how much power we're working with every day. And what that means is basically at Monta, we have a responsibility to make sure that we also contribute to a healthy and stable grid. As a tech-driven company, we want to build innovative solutions to promote sustainability, meaning that if we contribute to reducing our consumption when the grid needs that help, that means the grid doesn't need to be built out as big as possible, which is better for everybody, it's cheaper, these kinds of things. And we believe that accelerating and democratizing the adoption of EV technology is key to building a better future. So the better the grid can handle more EVs, the more likely people are to adopt it. And just to kind of dive in on the standards that help us kind of achieve our ability to respond to grid imbalances. So very quickly, between the electric vehicle, there are two standards. One is ISO 15118. Another one is IEC 61851. And then between that, the charging station and the charging station management system, which is us, you have OCPP. And then between the power utility and us, you have OpenADR. And then these are kind of not super relevant for this discussion, but those also exist to share charge points between two charge point management systems. But yeah, so how do all these players kind of communicate and orchestrate with each other? It's standards, right? We have standards to make it sure that we all agree on a way to communicate. And we do that by going out, talking to people, joining committees. And that's kind of really what's made it possible for us to have this, this collaboration between the utilities, the charge point manufacturers, the vehicle manufacturers, and us. So I'll start out with the very basic, the first standard that I outlined there. It's how does the vehicle talk to the charging station? So the first standard that we use there, and it's probably the first one that existed here, is IEC 6815 and 851, sorry. And that's basically, it's a super simple signal protocol between the charging station and the vehicle. So it's like, it's not even a digital connection. It's just a resistor that you pull down, and then it will tell the car will tell the charge point that it's ready for electricity. Yeah. And then the more interesting one is maybe ISO 15118, which is a high-level communication protocol. So this is digital. So you actually send data between the car and the vehicle. It's not super common in most charge points you see out there in the world. It's more for DC fast chargers, which is like the big boxes you see at gas stations and stuff like that. But that one's super important for us because it'll enable something called vehicle to grid, which I'll cover a little bit later. And then more on the standard that we use to talk between the charge point and the backend. And that's called Open Charge Point Protocol, also known as OCPP. The standard is created and maintained by the OCA, which is known as the Open Charge Alliance. It's a collaborative effort between charging station manufacturers, backend providers, power utilities, and some of the notable members are ABB, Siemens, Daimler Group, and of course, Monta. And the protocol is basically broken down into modules, so you can choose to adopt which module you need. So we've done most of these, but the bare one, or the one that you absolutely need to implement is core. And that allows for basic communication with the charge point, telling it to start a charge, stop a charge, getting information such as what is the meter, so how much electricity have I transferred during the charge. But yeah, so the important thing to take away from this slide here is that the standard is based on a WebSocket implementation, and it uses JSON. And I have some, criticisms of the choice of using WebSocket for it, but we'll talk a little bit about it later. Yeah, so there's 3 versions of the standard. There's 1.5, which was released in 2012. The world was very different there. It's made up of 24 different messages, so a response and a request and a response, 42 different data types, and 15 configuration keys. So the configuration keys are used to set up the charge point in a way that you need it. Then we kind of graduated to 1.6, which is where we're at kind of today. Most charge points out there in the world right now are using OCP 1.6. And I think the important thing to note is as we progress through the versions, things get more well-defined because we know better what the world looks like. Because in 2012, EVs were really new. People were still trying to figure out how does this thing work with infrastructure. And as we figured out, we also kind of saw that people interpreted it very differently. So as we progress through the versions, we get more use cases defining this should work like this, exactly like this. And then we also dropped SOAP. So we went straight into JSON because it was just easier. So now we have 2.0 or 2.0, which is not really adopted yet, even though it was released in 2018. But we are kind of heading, I think this year is the first year where I will say 2.0.1 is taking off. And that's great for, it's great for us because it's much more well-defined. And why does that matter? I think it matters because the more well-defined the protocol that you're using, the better things work between the server and the hardware. So with 1.6, we've had to do a lot of like hacks because everybody has a different interpretation of what the messages should work like. In 2.0.1, we see a lot less of that. Okay. So what does a typical flow look like in OCPP? So the charge point will send an authorization. So if you've ever used a charge point, you go up, you scan your RFID card, whatever. It'll start off by, as soon as you scan the RFID card, you'll send an authorized request. The charge point will talk to the central system, and the central system will decide, do I know this card? Will I accept it? Blah, blah, blah. Let's say it does accept it. Then once the charge point gets a response, it will then send a start transaction request or message, notifying the central system that, hey, I'm starting a charge on this connector number. It's using this RFID card. Here's the meter at the start of it, and this is the time that it started. Then the central system will acknowledge saying, okay, I got this info, go ahead. Then there's a few more messages in between there, but it'll continue throughout the charge. And then a user can go back and scan his RFID card. Then the charge point will send another authorization request to the central system. And if the central system says yes, then it will stop the charge, send the meter at the end of the charge, so then the backend can compare what the meter was at the start and what it was at the end, and the user gets billed correctly. Yeah, so it's asynchronous, so everything happens through a WebSocket, meaning that we have to kind of, every message comes with a request ID, and then we have to respond with that request ID in there. But yeah, so we've kind of done some work on innovating that flow there, and we open source that library, by the way. But it's kind of a rough overview on how that works. Okay, so what are some of the challenges that we faced working with OCPP? As I covered earlier a bit, the spec is not so well defined. We've kind of had to work a lot with hardware manufacturers to make sure that they're sticking to the implementation and not getting too creative. And yeah, so that's one of the issues. I don't think WebSockets was the best choice for IoT devices. We often have to maintain that connection. And when you're dealing with WebSockets over a cell connection that might be spotty, it's not always the most easy thing to maintain. So I would have maybe gone for something like MQTT or AMQP. Charging stations are the ones initiating the connection, leaving our CMS as a sitting duck. And maybe if I go over to the next slide or the next point, it makes more sense. Yeah, every time we deploy code, we would lose all of the WebSocket connections. So they would all have to reconnect, and we support quite a few different brands and models. So not all of them have the same connection behavior. So that would often lead to us getting DDoSed because they would just reconnect all at once, or yeah. But yeah, and then some charge points would take 24 hours to reconnect, which led to some very angry customers. Yeah, so how do we kind of solve that? The first version of our architecture was really simple. We just had 10 servers deployed, and they handled the WebSocket connection. They got the connection from the load balancer, and they just held on to this connection. And that was part of the problem, right? Because when we deployed a new version of the server, then we would lose that connection. And there was also another issue, right? Because when the mobile app would make a request to one of the WebSocket connections, we would have to kind of find it. We didn't know which server the WebSocket was connected to, so we created kind of like a pub sub. And that meant that the server that had the connection would subscribe to that topic, and then the server that got the request to do something on that charge point would then publish on that topic. Anyways, so the version 2 of our architecture kind of evolved that we created a separate node for the gateway, meaning the server responsible for holding the connection was a separate server, and the server for doing any kind of message processing, so storing the transaction, sending a command, these types of things, was on a separate server. And we use Kafka to relay the messages between these nodes. And maybe something to note, we almost never deploy this server. It's a super simple server. All it does is it takes a WebSocket message, puts it into Kafka, and then receives messages. And that's pretty important because we deploy around 5-6 times a day now. Before, we would do it like once a week. So it was a pretty big improvement to our lives doing that. Okay, so what does the architecture look like today? We're still trying to stick to not using microservices. We have kind of a domain-based service approach. We have 139,000 charging stations on our system. We have about 500,000 users. We do about 1.5 million charges a month and about 25 million kilowatt hours a month. So we've had to build quite a scalable system. We're still struggling a bit with the amount of charge points we have today. I think bad firmware really adds to a lot of our problems with stability, but yeah. Yeah, and then maybe just talk a little bit more. We support 570 different brands and models, which I think is a testament to OCP. That standard allows us to control multiple, or it allows a lot of different manufacturers and a lot of different backends to work together. And at the end of the day, it results in users having a free choice to pick what their backend is. Yeah, so, and this is a picture of us at like, every now and then the OSA hosts like hackathons for hardware manufacturers to meet and backends to meet, and then we just go there and we try to figure out, okay, how do we increase compatibility? How do we work together? That type of thing. Okay, now I talked about how the charge point and our backend talk. Now, how do we get information from the utility? So there's also another standard called OpenADR. It's based on XML. Later versions of it support JSON. So it uses HTTP, and it's kind of polling based. So it's not. It's a little bit more traffic intensive than WebSockets. And I kind of give a little bit more information on what a VTN and what a VEN is. So a virtual end node is basically a server that controls multiple top nodes, meaning that, so you can just look at it as an aggregation of a lot of different assets. And then a virtual top node can be either an asset directly itself, like a light or an EV charger, or it can be a grouping of them. So essentially, one VTN would be responsible for multiple VENs, and that's kind of that's like the basic topology of OpenADR. So maybe I can explain it in more simple terms. Monta would operate as a VTN, and then every charge point would be a VEN, and then we make that information available to the utilities. They subscribe to a topic, and then they would get power updates. But that's kind of, we're still kind of early on our journey to implement OpenADR. We went kind of more with a custom implementation. So here in Denmark, we work with somebody called Flower. And they are basically the ones who are working as an aggregator for us. So we make available to them all of our charge points. We send them information on how much power it's consuming, what the frequency is of the grid at that charge point. And they're the ones responsible for monitoring the grid. And so basically in this graph, what you can see is when a grid balance happens, there are different tiers of how fast you need to respond to that grid imbalance. So FCR is called primary reserve, meaning that is the fastest reaction time to the grid. There's actually one faster that I don't have listed here. It's called FR, which is fast frequency response. MOR is tertiary reserve, so that's like the slowest one, 12 minutes, 5 minutes respectively. But when this balance grid imbalance happens, so it drops, that's kind of how the utility is looking at activating its assets. And you might be wondering, why are there's these differences? Well, some assets take a lot longer to come online. So a coal power plant is probably in the 12-minute range, So it takes 12 minutes for that coal power plant to fire up the coal. A battery is probably an FCR. So a battery can turn on very quickly and start feeding electricity back to the grid. And what do you call this? A dam is probably within the 5-minute range. So that's why these different tiers exist. Charge points are relatively new to this entire system, so we also had to kind of figure out where do they fit in these tiers. Because a charge point can't necessarily give electricity as fast as some of these other assets. Yeah, because vehicles are slow, hardware is slow. Yeah, and then this one you can kind of see. So this line shows the frequency dropping and then how the utility would activate different assets based on that frequency drop. So they'll try their best to get the frequency to go back up by activating these different assets. Yeah, and the faster we can respond to these imbalances, the better it is for the grid. And some of the challenges we've had is actually because there's a car involved, there's a charger involved, there's a backend involved, and then there's an aggregator. That signal needs to get down to the vehicle as fast as possible. And we started out with like 1 to 2 seconds. Now we're down around 300 milliseconds, which is pretty impressive considering the entire chain of things that need to get activated there. Today we participate in FCRD, so that's the 1 second to 2 minute range. But we want to move into more markets with our assets. One, because we want to help the grid out as much as possible. Two, because there is kind of a monetary incentive for both us and the users to do that. And this is kind of the architecture of our grid service. So we have an MQTT server with Flower, who is the aggregator, the person who negotiates with the utility. So we're not negotiating directly with the utility. We have an aggregator who's doing that for us today. They talk to us using MQTT. And we do two things, right? We publish information about how much the charge point is consuming, and we subscribe to signals. So we on or off. It's kind of that simple. So should we turn this charger on or should we turn it off? So that goes into our grid service. And then internally, we use Redis and Kafka to, once grid has the right information and it knows what asset to activate, then it'll go over to our OCP server, which has a connection to the charge point, and it'll tell it to turn the charge on or off. Yeah, kind of a quick explanation on how that works. And here's a picture of the device we use to monitor the grid in our office. Flower provided to us, and they use that to kind of create this fun graph that lets us know whether we're on target for the grid. And okay, you can actually see here what the variance is for the regulation of the grid. So there is some wiggle room. You don't exactly have to be on 50. You can be, I think, 0.5 off. And there's a sticker that says, do not touch or disconnect. Okay. So how does that look for the user? Power bank will pause ongoing charges for around 30 seconds, having no impact on the overall charging experience. All participating assets get paid for the offered capacity every hour, regardless of activation time. So as long as you're charging, you're getting paid to participate in the grid. So if you own a charge point, you can get up to 50 crowns a month in Monta credits for just helping out the grid. So it's kind of an incentive, a way to get people to actually help out. And I guess something I really didn't make clear at the start. So right now, charge points only work in one direction, meaning they take capacity from the grid. So when we say pause a charge, that gives capacity to the grid in the sense that it's removing that load from the grid. But there are other assets that can do both. So a battery can both remove load from the grid, meaning the battery will stop charging, but then it can also give capacity back to the grid, meaning it'll feed back electricity. So today charge points are not there, but I'll cover a little bit more on that later. So we want to change the electricity consumption from unpredictable to predictable, and planned closely by collaborating with grid operators and participating in energy markets for more than just flexibility purposes. So like in an ideal world, you would never see negative prices. It would mostly just be everything gets slightly cheaper because demand is forecasted. that's kind of like the happy world where we should go to. Connecting to smart meters. Yeah, and then include more assets. So we would also want to include solar, batteries, heat pumps, these kinds of things to create a more full solution. As of today, the most important one is EV chargers, because that is by far a larger percentage of a household consumption. So I think the average house in Denmark consumes at most maybe 4 kilowatt hours. Kilowatts. But an EV charger tends to be around 11. So, it almost doubles it. Yeah, and then maybe the most exciting one and interesting one, it's called V2X, V2G. It will unlock a new world for the charging experience, but also has a lot of potential for grid operators. So, as I said earlier, charge points can only operate in one direction, but we're very much looking at a future where they can do both directions, meaning that you have a huge battery in your car. So if you allow me to do some more napkin math, there are around 300,000 EVs and plug-in electric vehicles in Denmark. The average capacity is around 40. So that's around 12 gigawatt hours of capacity just lying around in Denmark. And we can't use that for anything right now besides charging your car. If we were allowed to use that bidirectionally, that would be around 12 large nuclear power plants available for Denmark. So we're not there yet. The tech is still really new, and also the protocols are just catching up to what that might look like. So in the next version of OCP 2.1, they do support vehicle to grid, but that is just like the very tip of it. It also needs to be that the cars need to support the right inverter for, right now the inverter goes one direction, they need a bidirectional inverter. And maybe even like outside of the realm of technology, politically it needs to work, because in Denmark, there's not really an incentive for you to feed back electricity. If anybody has solar panels, maybe you know. Yeah?
First, I have an EV and I use Monta, and I'm really happy about it. But I'm wondering, I see this storage thing maybe earning me a couple of hundred kroners a month, but my battery presumably costs around 100,000 kroners. Wouldn't it be really stupid of me to degrade my battery in this power grid you're proposing?
Yeah, I think it really depends. So there is some problems with, and I really did think it depends on the chemistry of your battery as well. Do you know what kind of car do you have?
No.
Oh, okay. Which model is it?
It's a Nissan Leaf.
Okay, so it's probably still a typical lithium-ion battery. Yes, there is some problems with the degradation of the battery if you do this kind of thing. But I think it's not nearly as bad as people think it is. There's been a lot of studies to show what the long-term effects of bidirectional charging would be on batteries. And I think some of them show you would need to get up to like 3,000, 4,000 cycles, which is quite a lot. So I think, I don't have a concrete opinion on that yet. I think I still want to see more data on what that would be. And I don't think we will see that until we actually roll it out, right? So I think if you're kind of worried about that, then once this rolls out, maybe see what the long-term effects of that would be on the batteries. Yeah.
Thanks.
I think that was basically it for my presentation, so we can also just do questions if anybody has some.
On the market right now for the vehicles, that we can only consume electricity. Are there incoming cars where we can both consume and put back to the grid?
Yeah, so right now in the US, there are a lot of programs all over the world right now where V2G is being tested out by both companies and cities. So Utrecht in Amsterdam has had a project for the last 2 years where they're using Hyundai. So the Hyundai Ionity, it does bidirectional charging. Okay. Also the F-150, the Ford F-150 Lightning. It's a big pickup truck. It can power your house for like 2 days if you just plug it into a special charger. It's really cool. What else? I think Tesla has also come out and said that their vehicle is capable of doing V2G via a software update. We'll have to see first. But yeah, there are definitely vehicles out today that do it right now.
Yeah, because that's actually part of my question. My Tesla is, of course, not able to do it, and I'm not sure that that would require a new component to be in my inverter, because I think that the inverter will probably only go one way. I'm not so much into this.
So from a political perspective, it's been actually super tough because nobody wants. That inverter costs money, right? And the fight for the last 5 years has been between the hardware manufacturers, so the people building the charge points, and the vehicle manufacturers. Who wants to absorb the cost of that $800 inverter into the total price of their unit? Yeah. For a charge point, that's an extra $800 maybe is a lot because the charge point itself costs $500. But for a vehicle where it's $40,000, $60,000, adding that extra $800 maybe makes sense. And then for a long time they were trying to say, well, if this inverter is good for society, why can't we get it subsidized by the government? But I think now the charge point manufacturers kind of sucked it up, and they will start including an inverter into the charge point, from what I've heard. Yeah.
Maybe to add to that. Maybe to add to that, if so people who don't understand it, like the battery in the car is DC only, right? That's also when you do fast charge, you bypass the converter into the car and just charge on the battery directly. Where if you do AC charging at home, like with a home charger, it has an inverter in the car. But then if you connect to a DC charger, you can also decharge and have a converter in the charging station, right? So yeah, that's the complexity.
Yeah, it's one direction. So it goes from AC to DC, but you need a DC to AC converter.
Yeah, so they said AC to DC converter in the car. Yeah. And that's actually quite expensive component, but everyone has them because you need to be able to charge on AC at home, right? And even the small charging stations you have, like the clever one at home, those are basically glorified controlled on-off switches, right? They just take a 3-phase 220 volt AC and send it to the car, right? You could just wire up a cable yourself and do it. The only thing it has is a computer that controls it on-off, and then a bit of communication with the car, plus I don't know, a 3D modem and control stuff, right? And maybe a bit of security equipment. But yeah, it's the decharging the battery. You can either build that into the car, you can connect a DC socket, and then you can just decharge directly on the battery.
Yeah. A question for the napkin calculation.
Yes.
Let's assume that we, in a few years, have a battery technology that is much better than we have today, and that it does not degrade in any significant matter. How much would we need to improve the battery capacity, assuming that we have this bidirectional technology working, to have a completely stable net that would supply us?
So actually I can maybe provide numbers that I've heard from the Dutch utilities. So right now they need to upgrade, I think the number is 96 different transformers around the country in order to keep up with demand. If we started using smart charging, they said something like 26 or 20 something. And then if we had a bidirectional charging, they would only need to upgrade 4. So I think specifically in Denmark, we could solve a lot of the issue because imagine it this way. All of the wind is blowing, we're storing that power inside of vehicles. Everybody has a charger at work, you're plugged in, you store that battery, or you store all that excess power into the batteries of the cars, which we don't have today in Denmark. And then when it comes time for peak demand, then all the energy that was stored in the vehicles is now there to buffer that demand. So we don't need to buy expensive electricity from Germany or expensive electricity from, actually I don't think it's expensive from Germany, from Norway, whatever. So I don't have a number to tell you it would completely solve it, but I know it would go a long way to making sure that we're shaving these peaks off of demand and surplus.
Yeah, but the question was, you know, the order of magnitude of capacity of the batteries. You know, would it be twice as much, and then we would have the battery?
So today it's already good.
With the capacity we have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or like, do you mean the capacity per individual battery, or the total capacity of vehicles?
The total capacity, so that we would have, there would be no peaks, because we would always have enough battery power stored, and we would not need to sell. There would be no minus prices, negative prices, because we will always store more.
I actually don't have that number, but I think I can get back to you on that one.
It's kind of fun, right? Because we know that the technology, and this technology specifically, is moving very fast, and there's a lot of money in it, and you know, it's maybe 50 or 100% better capacity in the batteries in the next few years. I don't know. Is it enough? And if it is, then we have quite a new situation. So. Yeah,
I think it's also like. We'll definitely see a lot of more playing around with the chemistry of batteries in the up and coming years because of the issues with supply with what is the lithium? Yeah, I think question back there.
Do you know if there are any plans to buffer electricity at the larger power stations? I mean, you have the AC/DC conversion infrastructure already, so I don't know if it would make sense to even out the load on the internet, or at least to buffer. I mean, you used it already to buffer prevent brownouts.
Yeah, I think Denmark is trying to invest a lot more in battery capacity.
I mean, stationary battery capacity.
Yeah, stationary. Yeah, yes, okay. I think they're trying to get that built out. So you have companies like Hybrid Green Tech. They're working a lot more on getting batteries out. But it's coming from the private sector. It's quite lucrative to own a battery. So I know somebody in Sweden who works in the EV industry. He has I think 100 kilowatt battery in his house. I think it costed him like 150,000 Swedish or something like this. He might be a little bit lower than that. But he's making 5,000 every month offering that battery for capacity, just passively. So right now it's a very lucrative market to have a battery. Yeah.
Okay, Sasha here. It's not a question, but it's more a business idea. Maybe you have somebody in your family related to that. And that's what is Denmark famous for? They're not famous for producing cars. But what you see on the motorways in Europe is Danish trailers. So why not Danish trailer companies are putting battery packs in? They can also stand usually in the garage or carport, and being a kind of passive battery and a range extender for electrical car. So that is my business idea for Denmark.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I think it was a great presentation you had before, where you showed the car with the AC converter and the one with the DC converter. So my question goes on. First of all, could we put the converter into the cable, one way, or should we, in general, make our grid home to the houses DC based or rippling DC?
Like in the home?
Yeah, all the way. No, and maybe 500 volts. Yeah. I don't know, because I think what I see here is the challenge between who is paying for the converters.
Yeah, that was a problem.
And I think that's a decision that must come from. Is that a political decision, or what is that? Maybe you'll know that.
I think a lot of these things are always motivated by money, right? Like, for example, you could argue that the adoption of EVs in Norway was because the government set out so many incentives to get people to switch. Yeah. It could be the same thing here. The government says, we really want V2G. We'll pay for your V2G converter at the home.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The same thing is happening in California right now, where they give $14,000 to put solar panels on the home because the demand on the grid is too high and they want people to feed back into the grid. So yeah, I think it's something like this might need to happen in order to get people to adopt V2G.
I got inspired by the previous talk about thinking like a hacker. So if I were to build like a fake charging point and exploit the innocent cars plugging into this. Can you give me any directions to do that?
We actually have a fake charging point available. It's open source. This thing acts like a charge point. You could use that. But you mean more on like the physical aspect?
Yeah, I say back in the days when credit card were new, in Denmark there were these fake ATMs. It's good business. I want to do the same with charging points. So I want to steal your power from the car and data. Can I do that?
Yes. Let me explain. Yeah, I know. This should be open. Like, of course, Monta is a growing platform. We are also public, like at least our clients are. So you can download the Monta app, but if you download Norlys, UnoX, EV, Energy app, it's also ours, right? So a couple of things we are looking at in terms of fraud prevention, cybersecurity, these sort of things are. In Denmark, there is tax refunds for energy, right? So if you have a charge point at home, you can get refunded some of that energy, or that money for energy consumption back to you. And we have looked at cases where people use this emulator to get tax refund money, right? So that's or something similar, right? What else?
There was also a case where somebody was using the share now vehicles, going to their house, charging like 8 kroners a kilowatt, and then using those like public vehicles to get money from them to charge
for tax refund purposes. Yeah. So using share now vehicles for tax refund purposes as well, right? Other examples.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so there's a QR code sticker problem where we put a QR code, or our customers put a QR code sticker on the charging station to get people to download the app, and then some hacker goes around and put another QR code on top of it. That can happen. That's hard to mitigate. One of the mitigations is don't put a QR code, right? Just put the name of the app you have to search and find it, or put a rotating QR code if there's a display on a charging station, right? Then we had cases where the RFID cards you have to swipe, those are super easy to clone. So if there's a bug in some system where maybe somebody put tons of money into an account because they share their account for charging taxis or whatever, and somebody finds that out and they clone the RFID code and they use roaming so they can go to another network, so it takes time to discover. And then you charge a lot and get a lot of free electricity, and you give that to all your friends, and they do the same. And then when the bill comes a month later for that roaming agreement, you're in trouble, right? So I have plenty of examples, and of course we're doing tons of things to mitigate that, and a lot of that is monitoring, right? So actually figuring out, and then also encourage our customers to do the same. So monitor your activity on your network, right?
But I think it's a very young industry, and it's the wild west in a lot of places, and that's also what makes it exciting. I think things are moving so fast. To answer your question, there's this really lovely thing in Germany called Eisrecht, which is basically just signed data on the electricity meters, and that's kind of a way to combat fraud. So meaning that the meter has to have a public certificate, and you need to be able to compare that meter was giving you the correct value. It's not rolled out to Denmark. Spain is adopting it, but I can tell you from my perspective, it's really a pain in the butt. So things are moving in a more secure way, but it's taking time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have run out of time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everybody for listening.